Ladies and gentlemen, I have Dr. Michael Ruse and I have Dr. William Lane Craig for a second time, round two. We got off topic right away the first time we met, and we're here really to debate the central question, does God exist? Am I right there? And I look forward to, I familiarized myself with both of your arguments. I've watched a lot of your lectures, a lot of your debates. And the first thing I want to say is I really appreciate two people who are willing to take, there's a thing about in martial arts where it used to be you practiced your martial art and you were a black belt in your school and nobody would dare challenge you in your own school. So you were walked around and you were basically this lethal guy. And somewhere along the line, somebody said, well, wait a minute, if we get out in the street, this doesn't work because nobody cares about your black belt. And so that was the birth of sort of like mixed martial arts where people said, for me to get out there, I got to see if this works in every situation, no matter what. Does it work against a wrestler? Does it work against a jiu-jitsu practitioner, a kicker, a puncher? And I consider you guys to be mixed mental artists. I really appreciate that both of you, in good faith, take the fight to the street. And you are both willing to pit your philosophy, your faith against all comers. And I think that the world needs more of that. I think spirited debate is really how we move forward and either solidify our point of view or change our minds. So here we are with two of the leaders in that space. So I really appreciate both of you. I'm going to give you guys quick, brief introductions. You don't need any, but Dr. Michael Ruse is a British-born Canadian philosopher of science. He specializes in the philosophy of biology and works on the relationship between science and religion, the creation/evolution controversy, and the demarcation problem with science. Ruse currently teaches at Florida State University. He's a lover of all things Cairn Terriers and Whippets, which is a small version of a greyhound, if you don't know what that dog is. And then, of course, Dr. William Lane Craig is the founder of Reasonable Faith, a visiting scholar of philosophy at Talbot School of Theology, and professor of philosophy at Houston Christian University. And I have to say that Dr. Craig has been, for me, I keep going back to his YouTube channel. I'm going to post the link because he's got so many great videos there. And this is a man who is here, along with Dr. Michael Ruse, to debate whether or not God exists. Is that a fair characterization of what we're about to embark on here?
Except that I would like to do what we did last time, Bryan, and that was to have more of a conversation than a debate. I think we can have a good conversational exchange about these arguments.
I agree, and that's what we will have. That's what we will have.
That's a good point. Believe it or not, sort of dropping names. Last week I was in Poland debating, of all people, Michael Behe, the intelligent design chap. And frankly, I didn't think we made a lot of progress. I'm not sure that we would ever have made any progress, but we were kind of talking past each other the whole time. So I'm right with Bill Craig right on this one. I want dialogue rather than, just...
Great.
I'm going to win. Yeah. I've got the right thing. So,
yes.
But anyhow.
Well, look, you're both. I love this, and we will have a discussion. And I want to start really with Dr. Craig, maybe, because I want you to give us your argument for why God exists. Is that a fair way to start this? Maybe, and because what I really appreciate about the way you approach this question, Dr. Craig, is that you use science, you use math, you use reason, you use philosophy to come at this question of faith. And I personally, and just so everybody knows, I like to be very upfront about my confirmation bias. I probably lean toward Dr. Craig. I'm a romantic, and I prefer to live in a world that has a benevolent creator in it, and I believe that there's a reason for our suffering. So just having said that, just know that the fix is in. And ultimately, this is a slanted conversation. I'm going to do my best to stay neutral. So I give the floor to you, Dr.
You're doing a very bad job of it, if you don't mind my saying so.
At least I admit it. So this is great. Let's have a discussion. Dr. Craig, I give you the floor and take it away. Why should we believe in God?
In my published work, I have defended 6 different arguments for God's existence that I'm prepared to discuss today. And let me just list these, and then you can tell me, Bryan, which you'd like to talk about. Number 1, God is the best explanation for why anything at all exists rather than just nothing. Secondly, God is the best explanation for the origin of the universe at a point in the finite past. Thirdly, God is the best explanation for the applicability of mathematics to the physical world. Fourth, God is the best explanation of the fine-tuning of the universe for embodied conscious life. Fifth, God is the best explanation for the objectivity of moral values and duties in the world. And finally, the very possibility of God's existence entails that God exists. Now, that's just a list of the arguments that I think constitute a powerful cumulative case for God's existence. Each one is comprised of specific premises, and then the evidence for those premises that would lead to the conclusion that God exists.
Well, this is great. I'd love to go in order because I find all of those questions and all those statements to be fascinating. They're fascinating because I can't wait to get to all of them. I kind of want to talk about all of them at one time. So let's take the first one. God is the best explanation of why anything at all exists rather than nothing.
Yes.
I'd love to hear your take on that. And then Dr. Ruse, I'm sure you're familiar with his arguments. I give you the floor after that. So please.
Okay. It's appropriate to begin with this argument, Bryan, because Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, the great 18th century philosopher, said that the first question that should rightly be asked is, why is there something rather than nothing? There is no more basic question than that. And Leibniz argued that the reason that something exists rather than nothing is because there is a self-existent, metaphysically necessary being, which he identified as God, who is the cause and creator of the entire realm of contingent reality. Now, to motivate this argument, let me tell a story that was related by the great philosopher Richard Taylor. Taylor invites us to imagine that we're walking through the woods with a hiking friend, and all of a sudden you come upon a translucent ball lying on the forest floor. You would naturally wonder why it was there. And if your hiking friend said to you, "Oh, forget about it, it just exists, there is no explanation for its existence," you'd either think he was joking or that he just wanted you to keep moving. But no one would take seriously the idea that the ball just exists with literally no explanation of its existence. After all, the ball doesn't have to be there. The ball could have not existed. And so why does it exist rather than not? Well, now notice that merely increasing the size of the ball does nothing to provide or to remove the need for an explanation of its existence. If the ball were the size of a car, you'd have the same question. If the ball were the size of a house, same question. If it were the size of a planet, same question. If it were the size of the universe, the same question would arise. And therefore, I think that Leibniz's argument shows that the best explanation for why anything at all exists is that there is a transcendent being beyond the universe who is the ground and basis for contingent reality. And I've summarized this argument in 4 steps. Here are the premises and the conclusion of this argument. Number 1, everything that exists has an explanation for its existence. And this might either be in the necessity of its own nature, in which case it's a self-existent being, or in an external cause. Number 2, if the universe has an explanation of its existence, then that explanation is God. That is to say, a transcendent, metaphysically necessary being, which is the ground of existence of the universe. Third premise is that the universe is an existing thing. Now, from those three premises, it follows logically that therefore the explanation of the existence of the universe is God. And so the whole question would be, with regard to this argument, are the premises more plausible than their opposites? Now, clearly, the third premise that the universe exists is undeniable. And I'm persuaded that the other two premises are more plausible than their negations. And therefore, I think this is a good argument for God's existence.
Dr. Ruse, I take it you agree.
Well, why is there something rather than nothing? Of course, this is what Heidegger called the fundamental question of metaphysics. So Bill's certainly picking up on something which is very central. So, we're talking about an important argument. I'm not denying that. I've never quite heard God as being likened to the sort of supernatural soccer coach who's the one who's responsible for the ball being there. So let's go and play with it. But let me start at the beginning, because I'm not saying I'm undermining the whole Craig approach, but certainly when I was brought up as a Quaker, for me, faith was always more important than reason and evidence. In other words, revealed religion above natural theology, natural religion. And of course, as I've become more of a philosopher, I've realized that, in fact, this is a fairly fundamental part of Christian doctrine. I mean, for instance, Aquinas, for all the five proofs, Aquinas is quite clear that it's faith first and reason second, because he says, otherwise, how do you deal with people who are slackers? How do you deal with people who are not that clever? So I've always taken faith to be the fundamental thing. Now, I want to go a step further, because I don't think faith necessarily means that you're going to be flipped to the sort of Augustinian idea of a God, all powerful, all necessary, all something like that. I'm much more, I always was, much more into apophatic theology, namely, we can say what God isn't rather than what he is. And Quakers, of course, are very much known for their attraction to mysticism. And whilst I would regard myself as an agnostic today, and when the end comes, 83 next week, so for me, it's not that far off. I mean, I fully expect eternal dreamless sleep. But as I say, I'm more of a mystic about these things. So I'm very, what should we say, careful, dubious about saying too much of what God really is like, rather than the world, Haldane's statement, the world is not only queerer than we think it is, the world is queerer than we could think it is. And I'm very much moved by that. I mean, the body-mind problem, I just don't see how the hell molecules can think. So I don't think, I think there are a lot of important philosophical questions that, if I say we don't scratch the surface of, I don't think we scratch the surface of. So that's where I'm coming from. Right at the beginning, Bill Craig, in a sense, I'm saying, I'll listen to what you're doing, but you must understand that I'm not convinced that this whole approach that you're taking is the right one for a Christian.
But I have to, can I interject? Isn't the fact that we are born with a mind that can understand and wants to understand significant? Is that an accident, or doesn't that seem to have, doesn't that come from something? You see, I can never get around that. It does seem that, if this is a happy accident, boy, that's impressive. But it does seem that we are here, even here in earnest, trying to get closer to something like the truth. And I find that interesting. I think all human beings can never escape that particular mission, that trap, whatever you want to call it. And we're doing it right now. So does it intrigue you more than it doesn't intrigue you? Does it convince you more than it doesn't convince you that when Dr. Craig says something had to come from this nothing, or nothing doesn't come from nothing. Does his logic resonate with you in that sense?
No, it doesn't. You see, first of all, when we talk about, let's say, the soccer ball, and I or you or Craig says, oh, well, the reason why the soccer ball is there is because the coach just put it down and now he's going over to the field just to make sure it's all marked up properly, and then we'll come back and take the soccer ball and play soccer. The coach is an entity of the same order as the soccer ball. I mean, in fact, some coaches I've met are far closer than just entities, but you know what I mean. Now,
yes, but I think,
but now let me finish. Yes. I think Craig is slipping in a fast one here, because he's now saying there must be something which caused the world, this necessary being. And this is what's worrying me, is soccer coach, soccer ball, I can see one causes the other, but necessary being causes contingent world. That there's a jump there that, as I say, worries me. And I understand the frustration about it, but I'm not convinced that at some level we can say that with any confidence. That's why I'm always very dubious about natural theology, whereas I think that a faith-based position is able to say, I am aware of my whole being is flooded with a necessary being, which I believe on faith. And of course, as Kierkegaard says, in fact, natural theology is corrosive of real belief, because it's only worthwhile if it's a leap into the absurd. So, as I say, that's what worries me here, is I think that a three-card trick is being played on me or on us. We're going from a contingent world must have a necessary being, as opposed to a soccer ball must have a coach. I don't see them the same. And you say, yes, but there must be something. What about the person who simply says, well, maybe there wasn't something. Maybe existence was always there, always will be, always was, and there's no explanation. I mean, how do you explain a necessary being? I mean, how do you explain a necessary being who's then going to fashion a world like? It seems to me there's an awful lot of jumps being made here. And
isn't that a bigger jump, though, Dr. Ruse? Isn't that a bigger jump? Because you know that everything has an origin. Everything has a mover.
Yes. Everything we see down here has an origin.
Okay.
You have an origin. I have an origin. The damn instrument in front of you has an origin. But we know you have an origin, Mum and Dad. We know that this thing here has an origin, Texas Instrument Makers or something like that, all of the same order. Now, what you're saying is, here we all are. We must have an origin, and you're not prepared to say, oh, well, the Big Bang was caused by something before that. I can accept that, but why should I flip it to a necessary being, which seems to me to be a being of an altogether different order?
Dr. Craig?
I think we're in danger here of conflating this argument with the next one, the cosmological argument.
Yes.
This argument isn't talking about a temporal origin of the universe. It's talking about an order of explanation, and that there needs to be some ultimate explanation for why the universe exists rather than nothing. And I think that demand is quite reasonable. Remember the story of the ball in the woods. Merely increasing the size of the object to be explained doesn't do anything to provide or remove the need for an explanation of its existence,
which is your argument against the infinity argument. Is that right? So
that's the next argument.
Okay, sorry.
Cosmological.
I'm
argument.
Trying to grab. So the increasing the size of the ball to mean. Can you expand on that a little bit? Yeah.
Yeah, simply that the size of an object is irrelevant to its need for an explanation of why it exists, rather than not.
But then
just making it bigger doesn't do anything to remove the need for an explanation or to provide an explanation.
But why doesn't God need an explanation then?
Well, I think he does. If you recall the premise, it is that every existing thing has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. So Leibniz did not exempt God from his principle of sufficient reason. Rather, he argued that God is a metaphysically necessary being, a self-existent being, which could not fail to exist. He's not a contingent being. Now, that doesn't mean that God is wholly other, Michael, as you seem to have suggested. On the traditional theistic conception, God is a mind, just as we are minds. He's an infinite mind, though we are finite minds. But we have a univocal concept of God. It's not just a mystical blur. And with regard to mysticism, I want to say this isn't an either or. This is a both and. I affirm the mystical experience of God, and it's important for Christian life. I think that for the vast majority of Christians in the world, they have neither the time nor the library resources nor the education to pursue arguments for existence of God, but they are perfectly rational in believing in God on the basis of their personal encounter with God himself. And so I've written on the proper basicality of belief in God as well as these arguments, but they're not mutually exclusive. As Bryan, I think, has said it well, as persons who have been gifted with an intellect, it would be an abdication of our intellectual responsibility if we were not to think about these things and explore whether or not there are good arguments for God. And this whole argument comes down to those first two premises. Are they more plausible than their negations? And I think they are. And so it seems to me this is a good argument for God as the explanation of the universe.
Well, of course, you quote Leibniz. I'm going to quote David Hume, who says there's no such thing as necessary existence. But let's pick up on that. If God is all mind at some level, then how the hell did God create the football sitting there? I mean, if somebody says to me, oh, well, it started with the cow, which went to the slaughterhouse, and then and that I could see what's happening. But if you say it's just mind, then how do you get a physical thing out of this?
It sounds like you're getting into the math argument, right, Dr. Craig? I mean,
this gets into questions in the philosophy of mind. Michael, are you affirming what has been called the causal closure of the physical?
What's that mean?
That every physical event has a purely physical cause.
I don't think it's purely physical. Obviously.
Okay, well, I don't either. You mentioned before that molecules don't think. So I think if we have minds that can cause physical effects in our brains, then surely there could be a kind of cosmic mind that can cause physical effects in the universe. If you want to see the power of mind over matter, just watch this. Watch. I just raised my arm by willing it, a mental causation of a physical effect.
But what if you're
magic? He's using sorcery. What's that?
What if you're a panpsychic like me who wants to say body and mind are identical at some sort of level? So when you do this, it's not mind doing this to this. It's all part of the same deal. I mean, I just am not a Cartesian when it comes to duality with respect to mind and body.
Yeah, well, now we're getting into, I suppose, arguments for atheism, and I would defend the coherence of substance dualism with regard to mind and body, that only through a kind of mind-body dualism can we make sense of intentionality, of freedom of the will, of rational thought. If we are identical with our bodies, then everything we think and do is just the product of physical determinate causes, brain states and input into them.
The whole point is, if you're panpsychic like me, it's not just physical. It's mind and body. They're integrated in the same sort of way.
Right. Well, but then you need to explain why there could not exist a mind distinct from the cosmos if you're willing to posit a sort of mind that pervades the cosmos.
Well, of course, I mean, I would start to trot out the usual arguments that we have against Descartes. Why should the mind then be connected to the body? I mean, that's the problem that I think you run into. Whereas a dualist like me, at some sort of level, doesn't face that one. I mean, for me, it's all part of the same, what should I say, the same portion or the same position that I think. I mean, I'm with William Clifford Kingdom on this, that evolution suggests to me that mind was always there, and that, as it were, it becomes more manifest, but only because the body gets, physically more sophisticated. But I mean, for me, it's not a one or the other, but not both. Yeah. It's always the same.
But does the panpsychist really avoid the problem that you've just raised about the causal interaction between mind and physical states? Why does one physical state result rather than another, if you're willing to think that there is a mind that's distinct from the world, though always operative in it? I'm not sure you really escape that causal.
No, you see, the point is, Bill, is I don't accept a mind which is distinct from the world, a pure mind. For me, thought and physicality are always one and the same. I mean, in other words,
so you are some kind of a physicalist then.
No, I'm some kind of a pantheist, or what does Whitehead call people?
Let me steer.
Panentheist.
Let me ask you a specific question, because I do want to go in order of your arguments here, but I do feel like we're touching on the third argument, which is God is the best explanation for the applicability of mathematics to the physical world. We could get into the second question is God is the best explanation for the origin of the universe at a point in the finite past. And I think that usually the atheist rebuttal or someone else's rebuttal is usually something like, well, who created the first mover? So I'd like to avoid that for now. And I'd like to get into more because I think we're getting into this area. Dr. Ruse, if in fact there is, or there does seem to be, some kind of abstract explanation for the order of the universe, and it's called mathematics, and even a predictive mechanism for it, doesn't that bridge the gap between the abstract and the physical? Is this a good question, Dr. Craig? Dr. Craig, you look puzzled. Am I getting your theory wrong here, or can we jump to that? Can we jump to the third one? I guess God is the best explanation.
Do you want me to explain it?
Yes, because I'd love to.
All right,
I think
we're going to talk about God as the best explanation of the applicability of mathematics to the physical world. This is a question that was poignantly raised by the Nobel Prize-winning physicist and mathematician Eugene Wigner. Wigner noted that mathematics is amazingly accurate in describing the physical phenomena that he as a physicist encountered. Indeed, the laws of nature can be formulated as mathematical equations that are breathtakingly elegant and amazingly accurate in their description of the physical phenomena. And Wigner wondered about this. Why should this be the case? The reason that this was so puzzling is that mathematics is independent of the physical world. Mathematics is what is called an a priori discipline that is pursued independently of our knowledge of the empirical world. Wigner said that the mathematician pursues his craft by aesthetic motivations, that is to say, seeking for mathematical beauty and elegance. Moreover, these mathematical objects like numbers and sets, even if they exist, are abstract and therefore have no causal connection with the physical universe. If the realm of mathematical objects were to vanish overnight, miraculously, it would have no impact at all on the physical world. So why is it that these mathematical objects are so uncannily useful and accurate in describing the physical universe? Well, Wigner couldn't find an answer to this question. He said the applicability of mathematics is a miracle which we neither understand nor deserve. Now, Wigner didn't think it was literally a miracle. As a secularist, he thought it was simply an unanswerable mystery. But it seems to me that if we take theism seriously, that the person who believes in God has the explanatory resources to explain the applicability of mathematics, which the naturalist does not. Namely, that God has created and fashioned the universe on the mathematical model that he had in mind. He has established those mathematical laws of nature, and therefore mathematics is useful in describing the physical phenomena. This was the explanation that was given by the first century Jewish philosopher Philo of Alexandria, who said that just as an architect has the plan of a city in his mind, which he then executes in physical reality in building it, so God had the intelligible or conceptual world in his mind, and then he built the world on that model. And so it seems to me that the theist has explanatory resources that are not available to the atheist for explaining the applicability of mathematics. And so I formulated this argument in 3 simple steps. Number 1, if God does not exist, then the applicability of mathematics to the physical world is just a happy coincidence. 2, the applicability of mathematics to the physical world is not just a happy coincidence. 3, it follows, therefore, God exists.
Tell me, just a question, and it's a genuine question. Are you at all comfortable when Descartes, at the beginning of the Meditations, says that God could have made 2 + 2 = 5?
No, I'm not. I do think that there is such a thing as logical metaphysical necessity, and that this would be characterized or characteristic of the intellect of God himself.
Can you explain that, Mike? Dr. Ruse, well, explain that to me. I'm a layman here. What is Descartes? Was Descartes, when he was reading the Meditations?
Descartes talking about the power of God.
Right.
And most people, as I say, like Craig and like Ruse, would be inclined to say 2 + 2 = 4. Right. This is a necessary statement. 2 + 2 could never equal 3. It could never equal 5. Right. So, in other words, but Descartes seems to open up the possibility at the beginning of the Meditations that, yes, God does have the power to make 2 + 2 = 5. And if that's the case, then, as I say, I'm challenging Craig on this. On the other hand, if he says, no, you got the physical world, 2 + 2 must equal 4, then I'm starting to get worried about separating these two. As I see, what Bill Craig wants to do is say, here's the physical world, and now here's mathematics, and God slapped it on it like that. Whereas I want to do much more like that. Because, as you can imagine, I'm a pragmatist. I mean, of course I believe in mathematics, but I don't think mathematics has an ultimate spiritual source or whatever it is. I think the proto-human who saw two bears go into a cave and only one came out and said, it's raining, let's get out of the shelter, is probably not around. But the proto-human who saw 2 bears go into the cave and only one came out and said, bugger this, let's get wet, is probably around. So in other words, I'm, with Peirce, and William James and all these people, I don't want to separate mathematics off from the world. I want to say, this is the way that the world is. This is the way it's constructed. And this is why we think this sort of way.
But there is something to be said about the fact that sometimes mathematics can originate in someone's brain. So you have a mathematician who is, he's obsessed with numbers. He plays with theorems his whole life. He writes a theorem that's 300 pages long. Nobody understands it, but maybe 6 people. And 100 years from now, and this theorem came to him in a dream, or at least the beginning of it did, 100 years from then, after his death, somebody pulls that theorem off the shelf and says, this is actually applicable when I want to put a rover on Mars, or I want to measure the inside of a conch shell, or whatever it might be. So it does seem that we have something called imagination, maybe a mathematical imagination. Something seems to be a priori, or we are born with certain maybe our imagination gives rise to a physical reality, and it may be a long time after we're dead. So I don't know that math comes from, like as John Locke says, I don't know that all knowledge comes from experience. It doesn't necessarily. There are things we seem to know, at least some humans seem to know, that kind of come out of, I don't know, thin air, come out of something out of nothing when we are thinking and we are coming up with ways to be original. Isn't that what original expression is all about?
Let me ask you this. I take it you can get up and walk around the room.
I do.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes. Now, did this come out of nothing? I mean, why is it that you're able to get up and walk around the room, whereas my beloved Cairn Terriers can't do this? I mean, they can on 4 legs, but they can't do it on 2. Now, why is this? Because those would-be humans who didn't get up, didn't survive and reproduce like those who did. I don't see no reason why we shouldn't say at some level we've got an innate disposition to think that 2 + 2 = 4. And then, of course, inculcated by experience. I mean, there's none of us here, however brilliant a mathematician, didn't say, oh, Mummy, can I have 3 of these? And Mummy's going to say, no. I said, I'll give you 1 for each hand. 1, 2. There's not a third. All the time, you're learning. I mean, I agree. I think it's wonderful, miraculous, if you like, the way that people can take these and get into very sophisticated mathematics. But as I say, I think it all starts down at the empirical pragmatist level. And I don't want to do what Bill Craig, I think, is doing, is separating math and the world, as it were, and saying the miracle is God applied this to this. I want to say, a miracle, if that's the miracle, why the hell couldn't God then say, oh, well, 2 + 2 = 5 is going to apply to the world? It seems to me already we're constraining what God can do. And once we get into that, I want to start saying maybe the whole thing is a great deal more pragmatic. And that, now, please understand, I don't think any of this destroys the possibility of believing in God. I don't think that. But I think we're going at it a completely different way. And as I said, I don't know, and I don't much care for natural theology. Philosopher though I am. Anyhow.
Okay, now I think there's some confusions going on here that need to be cleared up. Wigner's argument is not about the evolution of mathematical knowledge. It's not an attempt to explain why humans have mathematical knowledge that they can use to describe the world. Michael's evolutionary account could be quite right. Rather, Wigner's concern is, why is the physical world structured in such a way that it is describable by these elegant mathematical laws? And it's not enough just to appeal to the logical necessity of the elementary truths of arithmetic, like 2 + 2 = 4. Wigner deals with that and says, yes, those are logically necessary truths and probably are a reflection of the way the world is. But he's talking about the mathematics of general and special relativity, of quantum mechanics and so forth. And these are not logically necessary truths in the way that the truths of elementary arithmetic is. The world didn't have to be built on these patterns or laws. And so there is something here that I think surely does cry out for explanation. And if I might just say one thing, one of the most startling features of the applicability of mathematics is that some of the applicable mathematics are things that cannot be instantiated in the physical world. The physical world could not exhibit that kind of physical structure. And Wigner gives the examples, for example, of complex numbers, imaginary numbers, which are multiples of the square root of -1. This is physically unintelligible. Also, he gives the example of infinite dimensional Hilbert space, which is used in quantum physics, can't be instantiated in the physical world. And yet, through the use of complex numbers and Hilbert space, mathematical physicists have been able to give incredibly accurate and elegant descriptions of the universe in which we live. And I don't think we can say that's just a happy coincidence.
No, this is where your teleological argument comes in, because the fine tuning in the universe is such that, you know, the idea that this was a happy coincidence seems to make no sense. But I don't know if, but Dr. Ruse, I'm sorry, I'll give you a chance to respond to that.
So respond to what?
What Dr. Craig just said about the fact
well,
that...
first of all, as I remember, you know, it's a long time since I did this, but as I remember when I did physics and did, you know, electricity and those sorts of things, before very long, even for A-level math and physics, one learned that there were certain theorems one could use that one could get answers, but they did involve the square root of -1. And these rather elegant theorems enable you to start with the physical world, end with the physical world, and you use these as a kind of sausage machine in between. So I'm not convinced that one could just immediately say, oh, well, the square root of -1 is, we call it an imaginary number, and that it's not applicable to the world, because I think a great deal more thinking needs to go on about that. And so, as I say, I'm not convinced of that. But my point simply is that you've got to start at the beginning. Why is mathematics applicable to the world? And I think Dr. Craig is separating the two and then making a mystery out of it, which he's going to solve with God. And I want to say, don't separate the two. So that does not demand God. I'm not saying that God could not have done it. I'm not saying that. But the point is, we're talking about whether or not one must appeal to a divinity to explain these things.
But Michael, your explanation of saying that these laws of physics are mathematically necessary, like 2 + 2 = 4, just isn't true.
Why?
Because they're contingent. The universe could have operated according to different laws. If that's the way physics worked, then physicists wouldn't ever need to verify their results through experiment.
But the point is, you're separating the physical world from the mathematics.
Yeah, I'm
saying the two go together. That we grow up, we evolve, and we learn that in order to manipulate the world, we've got to think in terms of 2 + 2 = 4. And we've got to think in terms of causation and all of these sorts of things. And that's how it all comes about.
Yeah, but the argument isn't about mathematical knowledge. It's not about how we come by our mathematical knowledge. We can agree with your evolutionary account. But your attempt to say that there's nothing to be explained here because it's logically necessary that these mathematical laws have the form they do just isn't true. And you must.
I'm not. Excuse me. I'm not denying the validity of the question. Why is there something rather than nothing? What I'm trying to, I go back to this and I say, I don't think appealing to God is very helpful. So as I say, I'm at the apathetic theology stage. I don't know.
What if I replace the word God with a mind?
Well, go on.
Well, look, seems...
The point is, we've gone over this, though, haven't we?
Well,
how can a mind, an unassisted mind on its own, put that football there and make it work as it does?
That gets back to the issue of substance dualism that we talked about. Yeah. And that's a whole new can of worms.
No, but it's not so much a new can of worms, because I think it bears direct relevance. We don't have a whole lot of time. I want to be respectful of both of your times. I can be here all day, but I want to be respectful of both of your time. But I think that this dovetails into, let's get into how most of us think about life. And most of us walking around the world are interested in this question. We can talk about mathematics and duality and things, but what we really, the practical idea here in walking around as a moral person who believes in all the good things, the objective moral values and moral duties that really govern our lives. If you're a rational being, it doesn't matter who you are. Now, there are people who believe that these came about through evolution, And if you do believe that these came about through evolution, people like David Sloan Wilson make this argument. He talks about amoebas who will sacrifice themselves for the better of the community and stuff like that. That's fine. Good, great book. I can't remember the name of it, but I read it. It was a good book. But, is that then to say that we are just here to procreate, further our genome, and that's where it ends just because life is all about survival, and so kicking a baby in the face isn't good only because you'd go to jail, and because just even though the baby is stealing a baby and selling it for a great profit, well, that's not good because society doesn't work. It would be bad for order. We'd probably break into chaos. Or is there something about it that is against some kind of law, a moral law? And if so, who wrote that law? That's why I think the religious idea behind God being the best explanation for the objectivity of moral values and moral duties, as Dr. Craig argues, seems to be the most convincing. Because I think we all live in a world, we all act as though God does exist, even if we are atheists or agnostics.
Yeah. May I lay out the premises for that argument, argument for our audience?
Please do.
This is the way the moral argument goes, which was my fifth argument. Premise one, if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. This is the position that many atheists would adopt. In the absence of God, there is no objective, absolute standard of right and wrong. Moral values are nothing more than the subjective byproducts of biological evolution and social conditioning. Premise two is that objective moral values and duties do exist in moral experience. As Bryan says, we grasp a realm of objective moral values and duties that impose themselves upon us. And one statement that you, Michael, have made that is seared into my memory in this regard is the following. The man who says that it is morally acceptable to rape little children is just as mistaken as the man who says 2 + 2 = 5. Now,
and of course, yes, but the point
think about that statement for a minute. That equates certain moral truths with the same logical necessity as the truths of elementary arithmetic, like 2 + 2 = 4. And I think that that's right, and that therefore the second premise is true, that objective moral values and duties exist. And from that, it follows logically and inescapably that God exists.
But of course, the point is, I want to say that mathematics and morality have a lot more in common, I think, than you're prepared to agree. Of course, I think that mathematics is objective. Whether or not it's subjective, it makes a lot of sense that when you're doing something, putting 2 + 2 = 5, I say, you silly, whatever, English term I use of you, you're making a mistake. And you say, why am I? I say, because 2 + 2 = blah, 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 4. Rather than 5. That's the way the world is. And likewise.
Well, yes, and you said earlier in our conversation, this is a logically necessary truth.
It's one, yes, and I'm prepared to say raping little girls is that it's immoral to do this is a morally objective statement. But of course, don't forget, I think it all comes about because we're social, we have these certain things. But if we thought that they were just subjective, they break down. If I thought, oh, well, being nice to Bill Craig, it goes down well, but I'll pretend to be nice to him. I benefit from that. But by God, he's better be nice to me because he believes it objectively. It would break down in a generation. So I don't see any reason why natural selection should not have made us believe raping little girls is wrong, but raping little girls is wrong is an objective fact. Because if we didn't believe that, it wouldn't work.
I feel like I've been cast out into the desert. I'm cold. I'm cold in your world, Dr. Ruse.
Look, we've got the same confusion going on here that we had in the argument about the applicability of mathematics. There I emphasize that the question is not the origin of our mathematical knowledge, how we came by the knowledge of these necessary truths of mathematics. Similarly here, the question is not how do we come by the knowledge of these objective moral truths and principles. I'm perfectly willing to accept an evolutionary account or social account of how we come by that knowledge. But this is not an argument about moral epistemology or moral knowledge. It's an argument about the objectivity of moral facts. And I think that Michael and I agree, it sounds like, that there are objective moral truths, such as the one he mentioned. And so the question will be, if God does not exist, what is the foundation? What is the ontological basis for these moral truths and principles that we both want to affirm?
Or maybe what's the purpose?
Bill, hang on. One thing. If you're playing baseball, it's 3 outs or 3 swings and you're out. You're playing cricket, you can keep swinging all day long as they don't, catch you, knock your bails, your wickets down. Now, within baseball, I'm perfectly allowed to say, oh no, you can't go for 4 because it's objectively the case that three pitches and you're out. It's within the context of this. And that's what I want to say about that. I want to go back to saying a cold world. No, it's not, because the whole point is, I think we're social beings. So if anything, I think the wonderful thing about human beings is that we are social in a way that very few other animals are. So I don't see my, as it were, subjective analysis of morality is cold or threatening or something like that at all.
Isn't it though, Dr. Ruse, isn't it so though, that there are some things that are really wrong and there are some things that are really right? And can you then say that living and taking actions that are really right, equality, care, love, things like that, are what get you closer to the truth? Is there no point other than the appropriation, then the sort of, then I guess increasing our population and increasing our creature comforts? What is the point of us here? Aren't we moving toward a point, a certain point, a specific point? Isn't that what we can't get out of? And aren't there things that are really right? There are things that are really wrong. We objectively agree on that, I think. But it sounds to me like you're saying, to what purpose, I guess, is my question to you. To what purpose? No purpose?
Oh, come on, 3 strikes and you're out.
Yeah.
If you turn to me and say, I've had 3 strikes, but, it's not an objective truth, so I'm going to have another one, I'm going to say, get lost.
Okay, so then the idea would be that it behooves us, if we want to survive, to live morally. Is that what you're saying? So yes, it's all about.
I don't think that we're thinking all the time. I think we thought that all the time, which we know people over-calculating. It just doesn't work. We have to be in a sort of situation where we can believe this and get on with it. But as I say, I don't see, you talk about it being cold or whatever it is. I see this as something which makes us social beings, which, as far as I'm concerned, is a wonderful thing. And my big worry is, why aren't we always social beings? Why do we have the Ukraine, for instance? And I think you have to start with my position and then see where did it get unpacked.
Yeah, it seems to me that, Michael, you're now starting to back away from your affirmation of the necessary truths of these moral principles akin to 2 + 2 = 4, and now describing them as more social conventions akin to the rules of a baseball game, which operates according to different rules than, say, football or cricket. And in that case, unless you're willing to say that mathematics are just a socially constructed reality, you've backed away from the existence of truly objective goods and evils and rights and wrongs.
But then how do you deal with the example that Darwin gives, that if we all grew up thinking that we were like insects and that, women should kick out their brothers as soon as it starts to get cold, they not only think they should, but they not only would they do it, they would think that they should do it. Yeah. And if it worked, there's no further
That's about moral epistemology. That's about how we come by our knowledge of these truths, not about whether or not moral truths are objective.
Well, you see, that's where
of course, if God exists, he can direct the evolutionary process in such a way that we will come to have accurate moral knowledge of the objective truths.
But I don't see how God can direct anything if he's just a mind and has no physical characteristics.
In the same way that my mind can direct my body, and apart from that, you'll have no freedom of the will. You're going to be stuck in determinism. You'll have no intentionality. Mental states will be causally impotent to do anything. It seems to me that on the analogy of the relation of the mind to the body, we can think of God in relation to the world as having causal effects upon the world. And I can't see any good objection to thinking that that can happen.
But you know that Presbyterians from Jean Calvin on have believed in predestination.
Yes.
And yet they all believe in free will. So come on, you've got to do a bit more hard work there. And of course, I, like many philosophers, starting with Hume, am a compatibilist. I see nothing wrong with saying everything's got cause and effect, but it doesn't mean to say you don't have dimensions of freedom, which are real.
Yes, I was talking about libertarian freedom, which I would affirm. I'm not a Calvinist or Presbyterian, but you're affirming compatibilist freedom, where, in fact, you're determined causally by factors outside yourself to do whatever you think and do, but you do it voluntarily. It's not as though you're dragged kicking and screaming into doing these things. But that just is to admit the point that apart from substance dualism, you're not going to have libertarian freedom.
Yeah, but you've got Mars rover that we know is ruled by laws, and Mars rover comes on a mountain or something like that, and it has to make a decision. Is it going to go round it? Is it going to dig through it? Is it going to, say, I didn't really want to go there in the first place? And I see this is the dimension of freedom that we have. And I think it's all we need, all we can have.
Wow. I mean, you're saying that we are akin to machines. We are moist robots. And if that's true, Michael, that really undermines
I'm cold again. I'm cold.
Moral values and duties, because machines don't have moral obligations.
No, I don't want to live in a machine world.
Well, I don't either.
Yeah. We could. It sounds like we have to agree to disagree here.
Yes.
I appreciate your time. I am, for my part, more convinced by your arguments, Dr. Craig, but I love Michael's petulance and his mind as well. I think these are important questions.
Yes, I think we've had a good conversation today and a good airing of the issues.
And I want to say that too, because I think we've had a good dialogue. I think that we've met each other and argued these things out, recognizing that they're important, but respecting the other person and realizing that we've got to talk about these and we've got to put them out so that, as I always say, if any of my people read what I do and say I'm right all the way, they're not taking me seriously.
Let me ask, that's great. I appreciate that. Let me ask you.
As a teacher, I think I always say, if you accept everything I'm saying to you, you're not taking me seriously.
Let me ask you both a question in closing. When was the last time you had your minds changed about some fundamental ideas, questions, whatever it might be? When was the last time you came into contact with evidence or something new that really caused you to at least question your paradigms? Mm-hmm. Dr. Craig?
I changed my mind about both the Leibnizian argument that I shared first today and about the ontological argument, which we didn't get to discuss. I thought initially neither of those was a good argument, and I came to be persuaded that these are good. More recently, I've been writing theology and studying the question of the historical origins of the human race. And again, I changed my mind on certain theological issues about human origins within the last couple of years. So
really?
I am open-minded and ready to follow the evidence where it leads, and those have been a couple of changes of mind that I've had.
Well, mine's been a lot more prosaic. I grew up in England in the 1950s, and I was sent away to boarding school because everybody knows that adolescents are a pain in the butt. They are awful. And so the best thing is, if you can afford it, is send them off to, a fancy jail, and they'll come home at vacation. Now,
Yes.
Since then, I've had 5 children, and in North America, you don't send them off to boarding school. They live with you, and they can certainly be a pain in the butt. But looking back, I would not have changed that experience one bit. I think having adolescents in the house is wonderful as you see them growing up and having to recognize with life challenges and all of these sorts of things. So, yes, I think you can have a mind change, and I've certainly had a mind change about adolescence. There you go.
Fair enough.
Nothing to do with predestination or free will or anything like that, but very important in my life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dr. Craig, last thing for me, you make such a great argument for the existence of God. Where I kind of get stumbled up is in the idea that Jesus is God. And my question is very quick. Is your belief in the idea that Jesus is God, besides the idea that there is you make a historical argument for the idea that the tomb was certainly empty, but putting that aside, is your belief that Jesus is God more emotional, not as rational? Is it an emotional argument? Is it something you just felt deeply?
No, I don't think it's more emotional. I want to repeat what I said earlier in our conversation. We shouldn't think that it's an either or between mystical experience and rational argument and evidence. And it's the same with respect to Christian faith as well. There is certainly an emotional, mystical experience in prayer, in worship, in doing God's will, but that's complemented by then rational argument and evidence. And I think that many people will tell you, Bryan, that in times of what one might call spiritual dryness, when your experience of God seems eclipsed or somehow God doesn't seem as real to you, then having those good arguments can really be a buttress to faith and help you to get through those valleys until you come out on the other side.
Now, as I would want to say, as an ex-Quaker, that I believed in God, that of God in every person, the inner light. And so, although I think Jesus certainly had spiritual insights that I think the Buddha had, for instance, but I want to say that at some level, we all got it. And that's what makes Anne Frank such a morally outstanding person, and what makes Heinrich Himmler an awful person. But it's because at some level, we do participate, if you like, in the divine. Now, as I say, what the divine might be, I'm not going to say.
You're a lot more religious than you give yourself credit for, Dr. Ruse. You're a lot more religious, and you're a lot closer to God, I think, than maybe you call it panpsychism, but what you're saying is there's got to be something else. There's got to be something else to this.
I think I'm a lot closer to God than God is entirely comfortable with.
He wants you to know him, Michael.
Well, there it is. Gentlemen, thank you once again. I just get so much energy from these conversations, and I'm privileged as just a comic and an actor to get to talk to men like yourselves. This is one of the beautiful things about podcasts. And there's a lot of bad things about social media and the internet, but this is one of the good things. It seems to bring us all closer to the important questions and the big ideas. And you give me a lot to think about, both of you. So thank you so much. And may God bless you, Dr. Craig, and Dr. Ruse. May panpsychism bless you. So I think
okay.
You guys are always welcome back anytime. It really is it's my privilege just that you give me your time. I really do appreciate it. And I will continue to study your work and be better for it. So thank you so much.
Bryan Callen, this is his intro song.